Okay, my name is Anita Jackson, and today's date is July 15th, 2006. I'm interviewing Charles Henry Lett at the Lett reunion at the Holiday Inn in Zanesville, Ohio, for the African American presence in the Ohio River Valley Oral History Project. Well, Mr. Lett, it's good that you're I'm going to ask you some questions and just want you to feel free and relax.
Be glad to.
Respond to the questions. First of all, let me get some background information. Say your full name. What is your full name?
Charles Henry Lett.
And what is your date and place of birth?
I lived in Morgan County, Deerfield Township, a place called Lemon Hill, and there's where I was born, August the 3rd, 1922.
Okay. And were you born at home?
Now, how's that again?
Were you born at home?
At home, yeah.
Okay.
And not in the hospital. The doctor came to your house at that time. This has been a long time ago, yeah. Things were a little different then.
Okay.
And when I was born, my dad told me later that my brother was born 5 years before me, and the doctor charged $10. But when I was born, it was 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
What is your family ethnic or racial background?
How's that?
What is your family ethnic or racial background?
Well, my original Sam Lett married Jemima Bannicky, and she was half Afro-American, might be a third Indian and Scottish. There was a woman from Scotland that had been not sold into slavery. This would have happened sometime in the 1700s, but they called it indentured servant. She had milked a cow somewhere in Scotland, and while she milked it, if you never was on a farm, which I was raised on, a cow will kick. A cow kicked the bucket over. Her people that she worked for assumed that she sold the milk. So they brought her up in court. Now this is what one of our ancestors went back and dug this all up. And they sold her into this, not slavery, but indentured servant for, I believe it was 7 years. And the man that run this back, he's still living, but he's not around here. He's up in the northern part of the state. And she worked for 6 or 7 years, and when it was over, she was to get so much land, some cows, and some horses, and then she was done with it. But she didn't get paid for her work before this. Now, do you understand what I mean?
Right.
Okay. She was from Scotland. Her name was, my wife knows her name, Molly. Her first name was Molly, but right offhand, I can't tell you her last name.
Okay.
She bought 2 slaves. Now this was a Caucasian lady, you understand. She bought 2 slaves. One of them wouldn't work, so she got rid of, I don't know what happened, set him free, I think. The other one, she married him. So that was where my background began. Not really began yet, but then there was a child born from, I think, this Tom Bannicky. And one of them's name was Jemima.
Okay.
And this Jemima Bannicky married Sam Lett. And Sam Lett was a white farmer. So then they had children, I think 8 children. One of them was Aquila. Aquila was my great-great-grandfather. So when they moved over here, of course this has been a long time ago, you see, if you were half black and half white, they called you a mulatto.
Right.
If you was 1/4 white, they called you, I know the name, but it's hard for me to grab it now. But anyway, there was a mixed racial background.
Okay.
So this Aquila Lett married Christina Cobbler. Now, there's two things on this. I have heard she's a full-blooded German woman. I've heard again she was half Indian and German. So I have told a lot of people she was full-blooded German. But I find out later maybe she was half Indian and half German.
Okay.
So anyway, then they had kids, and one of them kids was James Lett. That was my great-grandfather. Quilla was my great-great-grandfather. Now, not to confuse this, there was another Lett called Quilla. He lived in Michigan. So there was a lot, the name kind of followed the Letts down. And one of them, his boy, married a what they call a half-breed Indian. Maybe I'm using a derogatory term, but that's what they called it. Don't get my Aquila confused with this one. That kids went to school and they tried to pick him out because he's African American, and they couldn't pick him out. Now don't confuse it with that one. See,
Okay.
mine was the James.
So the Native American or the Indian party came from.
It would have been in Maryland, near Ellicott, I think, Maryland. Yeah.
Okay.
Now the reason where I get this at, I think Christina Cobbler was part Indian, because a white person told me that they heard him get up in church one day and talk about he was proud of his Indian ancestry. Well, my grandfather had straight black hair. You could part it forward or backward or anywhere. So I do know he had Indian in him.
Okay.
And he died, he was 84 when he died. He died in Morgan County on Lemon Hill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, since you have so much mixture in your background, how do you define yourself?
Just as an American.
Okay.
That was it. See, I lived in Morgan County. The township I lived in, there was all Caucasian. Practically all Caucasian. Why my dad raised me there? I have no idea. Most of my friends were Caucasian people. You had some problems, but I had lots of friends. I also had some people I knew didn't care for me, but, so I pass it off. Carry no grudge. I don't look back and talk this racial stuff. I figure when this thing changed in '62, don't look in the rear vision mirror. You look out the windshield.
Look forward.
So I hold no animosity to nobody. And that's the way I was raised to do that. And most of my friends were Caucasian. There was a few lived in the next township. But the township I lived in, we and one other family, they began to move out. There were several people lived there, but they moved away. Yeah. So I describe myself as an American. Not one bit ashamed that I come from the African community. It don't matter. That happened before my time. I don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what were your parents' names?
Sherman Lett. And yeah, the subject. They burned it down. So they run and drug the furniture out. I'm just telling you what the old timers told me.
Okay.
But the stove,
Who burned it down?
well, the Caucasian people, it was they come there, I think it was 1820. A fellow named McCallum was the first one there. Mm-hmm. They called it the Lett settlement because Letts were the most numerous. Mm-hmm. And then they started coming from Maryland. They moved to Belmont County, and from there they moved to Meigs Township. And I think it was about 1830 something, which was slavery in the South, but they had come from Maryland. Now you wonder how this Aquila Lett married Christina Cobbler, a white woman. The reason he could do it, it was under English law. This was before the Revolutionary War. England didn't care who you was. You could go to any church you wanted to. There was no segregation laws. Segregation law, I'm telling you what the old timers told me, come about when they become a United States of America, and from then on they made different laws. But when they got married in the Lutheran Church in Baltimore County, Maryland, That's how that come about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well, I just thought, you know, it's part of history,
Right.
part of who I am.
Now, do you have brothers and sisters?
No, I had one brother.
Okay.
See, my mom died when I was 6 years old. She had tuberculosis. She had taken care of a TB sufferer, which was my dad's sister. Now, I disagree with him. I wouldn't have let my wife take care of a TB sufferer, even if it was my sister. But see, I had nothing to do with that. And then she picked it up, and she died, I remember. I got a good long-term memory. My short-term memory is not good. For the first reunion was 80 years. And I told Robert Lett, you might not believe me, I remember the reunion. Now I don't remember who spoke. I don't remember who was there. I know a Caucasian man took my dad and me and my grandfather there. See, I lived in the country. My dad drove a horse and buggy. He never drove a car in his life. It was a great thing for me to get in this man's nice car and ride over there. So it was one great experience for me. So we got ready to sit down. My grandfather said, where you want to sit, Henry? He always was with me. Me and him was buddies. He said, I'm going to sit on this stump. I said, I'm going to sit on a stump too. They'd cut a bunch of trees. A stump, you know, is where you cut a tree down. And I remember that reunion. Don't remember who was there. I have no idea what they talked about. And but I was going to tell you about my mom. She told me, don't come in my drink. And I was years old. She taught me to go when I was frightened. Taught me this when I was 4 years old. And I heard her fall. And she said, oh, oh. I'm not boring you with this, Emma.
Oh, no.
She said, oh, oh. Well, back in that day, you done as you was told. Nowadays, you don't pay too much attention to the parent. He told me, go get your dad if I would fall. I went to the barn and got my dad. He come back, and he walked in the room, and he come out, and I remember I stood on a picket fence. There's a board here and a board up here. And I remember the picket fell off, and all at once my dad come out of the house and said, boys, your mother's gone. And I never seen such a look on a man's face. And I'd kicked the picket off. And they told me, never stand on that, and you'll kick off pickets. And I thought went through my mind, Mom's dead. Who cares about a picket fence? Just something that I never forgot.
How old were you?
I was 6 years old. I'd turned 6 August the 3rd. She died October the 3rd, 1928. And of course, my dad was like a lot of people. He loses his wife, he starts looking for another one right away. I kind of disagree with that. I don't think you're capable of looking for anybody for at least a year. But he did, and he remarried.
How did you do after your mother passed away?
Well, my grandfather done a lot for me. I don't think it'd have been a living, hadn't been for my grandfather, Judson Lett. He looked after me a lot. I followed him wherever he went. When I was 3 years old, I called him Bamboo because I didn't know how to say Grandpa. And then my dad remarried, and of course my stepmother wasn't the best to me, but I forgive her. And when I growed up, I took care of her, went to the nursing home to see her every day. I'd clean her up in the morning. I've even turned the hose on her. And that was my stepmother. There never was a night when she was in that county, in that there nursing home, that I didn't go see her. I may be putting stuff into this I shouldn't tell you, but I'm just telling you, you know.
Well, let me ask, where did you go to school and what was that?
Well, I went to school on Lemon Hill, a one-room schoolhouse. Me and my brother was the only, what we called then, colored kids in the school. Now, eventually one more boy went 1 year. And I went there till I went to the 5th grade. And then they centralized the schools. You got to remember, them was mud roads, dirt roads. It got muddy when it rained. And my dad never owned a car. He lived in the old days. He let time pass him by. And until he was 70, he still thought horses would always be here. Told him, Dad, horses is gone. No, he didn't believe it till he was 70 years old, so he never run a car.
So how far did you go in school? Like
Through the 8th grade.
8th grade?
But I got crippled. Something, foot broke down. I had to drop out for 3 years. And the children's fund, it was the Shriners Children's Fund, got my foot fixed for me and didn't cost us nothing. My dad had 80 acres of land, but it was poor land, and you know what I mean. He made a living, but he didn't have no extra money. So the Shriners fixed me up, never charged my dad a dime. And it's something I'm always been thankful for the Shriners. And then, of course, at that time, I don't think a colored person or a black, whatever you want to call them, could even get into Shriners. I doubt it, I don't know. But I didn't run into a lot of prejudice. Like I say, the kids I grew up with, they didn't have no money to go in the restaurants. So if I went to town with one of them, so what? They didn't have no money, and I had the skin that wouldn't let me get in. And but of course, it's all changed now. And like I tell you, I hold no animosity for nobody. And my culture has always been, it's just Appalachia. Because until I was 20 years old, I didn't know there was a black world out here. Right. I had no idea. I lived in a Morgan County, in an all-Caucasian world, played ball, went to school with everybody. How would I know there was anything else? Half the time, this was in the 20s, half of the time, they didn't even take a paper.
Right.
So you see, we were isolated.
Did you have radio or?
Did I what?
Did you have radio at the?
Well, got our first radio, I must have been, I would say about 13.
Okay.
And I'd been to one picture show in that length of time, and I expect I had probably drank half a dozen bottles of pop. And I never will forget my uncle, Charlie Clifford, used to come down from Zanesville, and he would bring weenies. And to me, that was the greatest thing I had ever tasted.
Okay.
We had beefsteak, we had steak, grain-fed steak, but you didn't want that, you're tired of it. And these weenies was better to me than all the steak and ham. Even during the Depression, we had ham, steak, because we butchered it. And we grain-feed it, so it wouldn't be grass-fed. And if you know anything about beef, that's what makes good beef, is the grain. But weenies was the greatest thing that I had ever tasted.
Wow.
But you know, you don't miss what you never had.
Right.
And Dolly Parton made a remark one time, and I think there's a lot of truth in it. We were poor, but we didn't know we were poor. We would go to town. They never bought me no candy. Once in a while, great while, he'd buy me a bottle of pop. And we would come home by horse and buggy. I'd make it last till we get home. Get a drink now, and then another drink.
I can remember having a bottle of pop, and I'd have to share it with my brother and sister, and it was only at like an 8-ounce bottle.
Yeah.
But having to share that, so you only got a little.
But that cost a nickel in that day.
What did you go into? What was your job or your occupation?
Well, when I got out of school, there was a farmer there. He had about 400 acres of land. He pretty well fixed fellow.
Okay.
And he was looking for some help. He said, I'll pay you 10 cents an hour, $1 a day, for 10 hours. So it was probably 7 or 8 miles from my place. So I boarded with my brother. He had got married and lived a couple of miles from it. And I worked for him all winter for $1 a day. And then I quit in the spring. I kind of wanted to snag sucker fish out of the creek and swim in the creek, you know. And I quit, and then I went back the next year, and I worked there. And see, they taught you to be saving in that day. All winter, now I had to pay my brother $2 board. That left me $4 if I had a good week, if it didn't rain me out. But by spring, the May the 1st, I had saved $40. Now, So I valued that $40. You know, I put that $40 in my pocket, and when I went to the city with my dad or anybody, I'd spend a dime. And then I'd go home and count it. And it lasted me for a year. But, you know, and can I tell you a little story in the meantime?
It'd be nice if people were.
I and these so was on, so I took me since I never had any money. My was 19. Yeah, what 18 decided besides the bowling station. Where about that's what I talk about. And the Wellington, he was in here, he said, I got one more clip. 1918, and I said one of them run over by something like a metal wheel that's bent. That man opened the pocketbook up, it's your pocketbook.
Wow.
And he said, how did you remember that? I said, because I never had any money, that's why. I didn't mean to take up your time, but I had to tell you that.
That was interesting. You really studied that money.
Well, I never had any, so I got in front of the courthouse. Well, the war was going on when this is the year I was born. Wonder if it was the month I was born.
Now, what's your spouse's name? What's your wife's name?
What's what?
Your wife's name.
Leona. She was a male. Leona May Male.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Her people come originally from Barber County, West Virginia.
Okay.
Originally, that's her ancestry.
All right.
Yeah.
Her last name was what?
Male, M-A-Y-L-E.
Okay.
There's different ways to spell it, M-A-L-E or M-A-Y-L-E, but this was M-A-Y-L-E.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And she lived in Virginia?
Well, no, she lived down by Chesterfield. She was born in Plantsville, Ohio.
Okay.
But I'm telling you, her ancestors came from Barber County, West Virginia. And there were a lot of mixed-race people came from, even that man right there. A lot of his ancestors came from it. Yeah. Didn't they, Paul? Yeah.
Okay. And then, how many? Five?
Five. David, he's on the fire department here in Zanesville, and he's content right now, but he stay a little longer, and he still works at City. And then I got one boy named Dan, and he works at Longaberger in up above Frazeysburg. And I have a daughter, the one, well, that was your daughter here, wasn't it? The girl that was in here.
Oh, that was just here?
Yeah.
No, she's...
Well, anyway, she was out there talking to him.
Okay.
She married a fellow from Cambridge, and then Danny married one from Zanesville. David married a girl by the name of Dalton from Zanesville. And then Douglas, he has chose not to get married yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I have a daughter, Denise, and she lives in Westerville. She married a fellow from North Carolina. He's a custom agent, United States custom agent for the government, yeah.
Now, can you tell me the dates when your children were born?
Let's see. David was born August the 9th, 1949. And Danny was born July the 24th, I believe it is, 1955. And Denise was born August the, Denise was born October the, well, let's go to Darla. Darla was born in October the 24th, I think, 3rd or 4th, and 69. Denise was born in 63, and I think it was October the, well, she'd be mad if she knew I forgot. My long-term memory is pretty good, but let me think. I believe that was October the 5th, that's when it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was in 63?
That was in 63. She was born in 63. Okay. And Darla was born in 69. Douglas was born in 58. And that was July 24th.
Okay. All right. Now, how did you get involved in the occupation that you were in?
Well, I was raised on a farm, and I was a farmer. That's all I knew. But when I left home, then I joined the Navy on the 20th day of August, 1942. They had just allowed blacks in then, you could get in as a mess attendant, which served tables, but they just allowed us in, and in June, and I joined up on the 20th of August, and I was stationed in California, like I told you. I got my training at Great Lakes, and I served 18 months in the New Hebrides. I think it was 4 or so months in Hawaii, and then 4.5, and then I was stationed in California. Vallejo, I was there for over a year.
What was that like for you being in the Navy?
Well, it was a new experience. Number one, I had never been among black folks before. There was a few lived in Morgan County, but they were scattered. And I come into contact with black culture for the first time in my life. I was raised way back. I was 6 miles from town. I always said 6 miles from nowhere. Paul knows where I was born, don't you? And see, my dad having no automobile, unless somebody was gone there that you knew, you didn't go nowhere. I mean, you could go into McConnellsville or go into Malda, but you played ball, swam in the creek, picked blackberries, if you can call that pleasure. And then everybody, I raised a garden. Oh, I raised me a terrible garden, big garden.
Really? Well,
Big sunflowers way up over my head. And we lived off of vegetables. See, you pretty much lived off of the land.
Right. Now, I heard you say you trained at Great Lakes.
That was at Camp Robert Smalls. And this Robert Smalls was named after a black guy that let me think he was a man, he done something famous, I'm not sure. He could have been the one, I'm not sure. Do you know what Robert Smalls did? Something he did famous. That's why they named the camp after him. See, there was 17 training camps at Great Lakes. There'd be Perry, Smalls, and the name Smalls after this black guy.
Okay.
And they just opened this training camp up. At that time, the only way we went in, you had to go to Norfolk, Virginia to become a mess attendant. And the mess attendant served the officers.
Okay.
They prepared the food for them. They didn't prepare the food for the run of the mill, but it was a kind of a stigma attached to it. Like there'd be a stigma of shoeshine boy.
Right.
You understand what I mean? It was a stigma. So I would have went in before that, but didn't like that stigma. So as soon as they opened it up, I joined.
I was just curious about that because my dad also trained at Great Lakes, but you're saying that there were like 5 or 6.
Oh, there must have been. There was 16, I believe. Now I can't remember all of them, but we was in Camp Robert Smalls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's switch a little bit and talk a little bit about religion. Tell me about the religion of you and your family.
Well, back in that day, let me go way back. When my dad and mom left Meigs Township, they went to the All-Caucasian Church. I say all, it wasn't all because my dad and grandfather, so they belonged. And this is something that my grandfather was always proud of. He was one of the trustees of the church. They began to get along good over there. And he was one of the trustees, and he was very proud of the fact that he rung the toll bell. Now, do you know what a toll bell is? All right? And there was a lady died, and her name, let me think, her name was Dingy, I believe.
Okay.
She lived to be 100, I think 3 years old. So my grandfather, something wouldn't mean nothing to you probably, but he was so proud that he was able to ring that toll bell. When the ambulance hearse left the home, you started ringing. And you rung the last toll when they pulled into the church. So he had to ring it 103 times. Now they had an article in the paper about this lady dying. I felt like calling them up and telling them that my grandfather rang the toll bell. And he got my dad on one hill and his sister on the other hill, and they would wave to him where they were at. And you started ringing it. That's when they left the home. And he had to go maybe a couple of miles. And when you were supposed to ring the last toll, when they pulled in and said, "Whoa," to the horses.
Wow.
Well, my grandfather rang that bell, and boy, was he proud of that. Oh, he just loved that.
Wow, what an honor.
But they was getting along pretty good. But to go way back, they went to going to church all together first, and then they fell out for some reason. I don't know what reason. But anyway, I was telling you about them burning the schools.
Right.
They'd run up and jerk the stove out.
Out of the church?
Yeah,
Or-
because it was on fire, no way of putting it out. And then they burned it the next year. They jerked the stove out. So the next year when they burned it twice. Now let me see. And the last year they burned it, the stove disappeared. So they never knew what become of it. And there was a Caucasian lady lived over there, and she passed away. Before she died, she wanted to talk to these people, a lot of the colored people. Then they were starting to go to church at the same church. So she said, "You probably wonder what happened to that stove." And they said, "Yes, they did." She said, "Well, I know what happened," and I cried about it, but said they dropped it in a big spring over. You know what a spring is? It's not a well. It's a spring that goes down maybe 10 feet.
Okay.
Then you have to clean it out every 2 or 3 years. Nobody used it anymore, so they dropped it down in that there spring. So they went and got it. Wasn't no good. It'd been 30 years. I always said they should have saved that stove. That was history. But they didn't. They should have saved that stove. But before it was all over, they was getting along good over there. Now, I'm not, they didn't marry one another, which they do today. They didn't marry one another. But Grandpa told me he never had no trouble after the Civil War. And I didn't know any of them to marry across the line in that day. And there was an old schoolhouse. The last one stood. Before the coal company tore it down, we went over there, and all the names, everybody that ever went to that school was wrote on the wall. There was people that didn't even go, just kind of wrote it on there. And too bad we didn't get pictures of it. I did get a picture of it before it fell in, but that wasn't really, the school.
When you think back to the church, though,
Well, the churches, we first went to Lemon Hill. They sent a letter down that they belonged to this church in Lytlesburg, which was a white church. And there was a white church on Lemon Hill. We went there for a few years, and then they did away with the church, not over no racial
Was that a
thing.
Protestant church?
Yeah, it was a Methodist church.
Methodist.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I'm not mistaken, the one in Young Hickory was a Methodist church, if I'm not mistaken. And then later on, my dad and several of them went together and took up money and built what they called then a colored church. a Baptist church right outside of Malta. And it was a Baptist church, and they always said they were Methodists in a Baptist church. Reverend Holt, he was from Louisiana. He was the preacher there. And I know that Reverend Hart was right, because he'd drive from Zanesville down there and preach. That was before they built the church. It was an old dance hall. And the collection would be $2, $1.50. So he went to help the people. He didn't go to make money.
Now, your family, you and your wife and your children, what church did you?
Well, I'm sorry to say I'm not a member of church now.
Okay.
I believe in religion. I believe in the good master. But there's one thing I don't believe: anybody's going to burn in hell's fire. I don't believe that. I believe that's something that was added to it. Maybe I'm wrong saying this. I live a good life, do the best I can. I don't think a just God's going to burn a soul forever and ever. I'm just giving you my opinion.
Well, that's what
I could be wrong.
That's what we want to hear.
I could be wrong, but that's my belief. I think, and I'll tell you why I believe that. There's some things in the Bible that are, what do you call it, metaphor or something. They said a donkey talked, a snake talked. Now you know, and I know better than that. Did you ever see a snake talk? That snake didn't talk. Now they might have thought he talked. And I think some of the things it was wrote by man, I think some of the things, maybe they thought they was inspired by God, maybe it wasn't. But don't get me wrong, I believe in church, definitely. If there was never a hereafter and there was never a God, just good common sense. Just good. That 10 Commandments, if you live by that 10 Commandments, you haven't done nothing wrong.
Thank you. Tell me about how you learned about slavery.
Well, my grandfather talked about it.
Okay.
Because he was born in 1851 over here by Young Hickory. As far as the N word, if I would have said the they viewed that as a 4-letter word. You did not say that. You could say Negro, but if you said that other word, the N word, he would tell you right now, shut your mouth. That word's not spoken in this house. That was his belief. Now you hear kids in school, what's his name? The singer, the man that, not the singer, I know his name as well as know my own, told him about using that word. What was his name? Crosby, Bill Crosby.
Oh, Bill Cosby.
Said that word should not be used. And they got all over him for it. I'm 100% behind Crosby.
Right.
If you want to be respected, then act like you're going to be respected. And don't call me that and expect nobody else to call you that. And my grandfather, he taught me that. That's one of them things. And I know, tell you something happened in Morgan County. A lot of these people felt like that. One colored man called the other, and that he very near broke his jaw right in the store.
Wow.
He was in the AP store, and he hauled up and hit that man and knocked him clear out. Told him, don't you ever say that to me again. But you call him a colored man or a Negro, he didn't say a word.
Right.
They called that a very commentary word.
What are, that's a very important message. What else did you learn about slavery? What
Well,
other things
my
did you-
stepmother's father was a man from Mississippi. My dad met her on a train, met my stepmother, and they got married about a little over a year after Mom died. And he come to live with us the last 2 years. And he told me his grandmother told him about slavery. And he was really down on it. And he told me that the custom there was, he come from a family of 17 children. His name was Andrew Jackson Cumbus. He had 17 in the family. He told me he worked for his dad. His dad owned this plantation somewhere in Mississippi. And he told him, Andrew, you're 21. Now you have to move on for the little ones. It was 17 of them. He said his dad gave him a pistol You could pistol or a shotgun, whichever you wanted, a horse, and a dowry of $3. And then you had to go from there and make it. Now, that was a custom in Mississippi at the time. Yeah, he was down on slavery, but he didn't dwell on it. He was like Adam Clayton Powell said. Not Adam Clayton Powell. No, the man that was, I know his name well as know my own, Colin Powell said. He was like that. He said, you don't look in the rear vision mirror. You don't have a key. You cannot turn back the clock. You look through the windshield. You can't do nothing about yesterday. All you got is today and tomorrow and hereafter. You can remember, but don't look back. And I think Jesse Owens said, don't look back. No, it was the ball player. Don't look back. Something might be gaining on you.
Jackie Robinson?
Yeah, no. The fellow that, Satchel Paige.
Oh, Satchel Paige.
I think it was Satchel Paige, yes. It never look back. Something might be gaining on you. But I do believe this. I believe you have to look forward. They don't make a key. You can't turn back the clock.
Can't turn back the clock.
Yeah. I've always told my kids that.
Well, because I heard a story of, and I want to check this out with you, about the runaway slaves who were hidden beneath the haystack.
About what?
The runaway slaves that were hidden beneath the haystack.
Oh, in the haystack?
Yes.
Well, now, you got that wrong. This is the way the story was. My grandfather told me this. He died back about 35. He was a little boy. And so, naturally, James Lett was walking a tightrope. I don't know where these people got their money, but they were pretty well fixed by them standards. For when he died, he had 12 children and took 2 to raise. When they settled his estate, each one of them got $1,200. That is nothing today, but that was a lot of money in that day. So a Caucasian man had came to him and said, I got some slaves here. He said, well, I didn't know you was in it. He said, no, I don't, nobody knows it. They're coming to raid me. I've been tipped off. Sheriff's office or somewhere. They're coming tomorrow morning. I got to get them out of here. You being a colored man, I think you'd understand. Well, where would you want me to put them? He said, we'll take a haystack and we'll hollow it out. So they hollowed it out, braced it. The lumber was cheap. Everybody had lumber. So they braced it up, put them in the middle of it, left them a place so they could breathe through, and that's where they was at. So James Lett told his family, we are going to church. The fellow told him, one of the men that was in this underground movement, talked to him, don't do anything different today than you did yesterday because the slave people are coming.
Right.
If you took your kids to church, take them. If you didn't take them last week, don't take them this week. So he made one fatal mistake. James Lett told his kid, he said, you can play anywhere on this farm, you can play, but you stay off of that haystack. It's like telling the boy, don't play with the gun. Stay away from that haystack or you're going to get strapped when you get back. So they played everywhere there was to play. And one of the older boys said to Grandpa, said, let's go slide down the stack. Well, Dad didn't told us not to. Yeah, let's go anyway. He won't be back for a while. So Grandpa and this other brother of his was sliding down the stack, and it would only take so much, and they fell through. And when they fell through, they seen all these people in here. I don't remember how many there was, 6 or 7. So the only thing they said, let's go get Dad. Where did these people come from? So they started running towards the church, and the first wagon was my grandfather. What's the matter? We found all these people in a haystack. He grabbed them and get back in that surrey. Keep your mouth shut. What's the matter with you? He got all over him. And Grandpa said we couldn't understand it. He was mad, and we thought we was informing him of something. And he told him, give him the story. He said, no, I don't want one word mentioned about this, and it wasn't. So the next day, after the people come for the slaves, they moved them back to this man's farm. So this man told my grandfather, I'm getting this from Judson, my grandfather, told him, don't you mention this to nobody. Civil War was still going on. Don't you mention this to nobody. Me and you are not even going to talk about it. And my great-great-grandfather said, well, I didn't even know you was in it. He said, I know you didn't. Nobody else did. And from that day on, they never even talked about it. That's the only time my great-grandfather ever kept them, but that was that one time. And I know that was the fact when my grandfather told me that. And my grandfather was a strong religious man. Told me he never cussed but once in his life. The old sow had pigs under the barn. Couldn't get them out. And he said, I apologize, I cussed. Asked forgiveness, never done it again.
Wow.
And if I must say so, my grandfather was a good man.
So that story you just told us about the haystack, when did that happen?
What's that?
When did that happen?
That would have been, the war broke out in 61. My grandfather was born in 51. This was before the Civil War. My grandfather would have probably been about 8 years old, 7 or 8. But he vaguely remembered it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so about early 60s, 1860s.
It'd been either the late 50s or the early 60s. The Civil War had been going on, they wouldn't have been hunting them. They wouldn't allow them up here to hunt them.
Right.
Because it was over slavery. So it had to happen before 61.
Okay.
Probably my grandfather would have probably been 7 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the only thing I know about that. But my long-term memory is good, but my short-term one is short. I can lay a hammer down 10 minutes. What'd you do with that hammer? Let me think. I don't know. But when I was a little boy, I learned my mom showing me how to garden. I was 4 years old, and I still garden, just for what Mom taught me. Yes, sir.
Do you remember any stories about any of your family members being
About what?
Your family members being enslaved?
Well, no, the only ones I told you about was Sam Lett married a daughter of one of the slaves from this Scott woman.
Right.
And that's the only time. And of course, the slavery was going on in Maryland. That's one of the reasons they left. They were free people. And how they got free, this lady that married Sam Lett, she had bought these 2 slaves, this Scotch lady, and she had kids by him. One of them was Aquila Lett. So it goes back to these 2 slaves that she bought and then set them free.
Okay.
Now that was the only ones that would have been enslaved, because then in about 1820-some, about 1827 or 8, they left there by covered wagon and went to Belmont County. Now I'm telling you what they told me, I understand.
Right.
I'm not telling you something I read, I'm telling you what they told me. And they bought the land off of the government for $1 an acre. Now I have no idea where they got the money. Maybe they just made it and saved it. Nobody, some people says that Benjamin Banneker had money and they got it from him. Benjamin Banneker died the day he died. He died near Ellicott, Maryland. I even went there to the farm. Didn't get to the farm, it was getting dark, and we wanted to get to Washington, D.C. There was a Caucasian man there, told me, I'll take you to the farm, but it was getting dark. Stay all night. Well, we was on vacation, you know how that is.
Right.
So I never got to get on the farm. Since then, they have built some kind of a structure there to honor Benjamin Banneker. And if you don't know who he is, you can look into history, find, well, his daughter, his sister's child was my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. So I'm a direct descendant of the Banneker family, not Benjamin. He never got married. He's the man that invented the clock. You've read about him.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm a direct descendant of his sister, Jemima. And she, you want me to give you the story? This man was like this girl. I guess they say she was a beautiful girl. She was half Scottish, half black, maybe some Indian. I'm not sure about that. He wanted to go with her, live with her, and she wouldn't do it. His name was Lett, Sam Lett. Now that's how I come into this world. That was my ancestor. He was a white man.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
All right. Okay. What are some other things you'd want to share about your family?
Well, I don't know anything. We're just hard workers, taught to be honest, and don't take nothing that don't belong to you, and be proud of who you are. I don't mean to have your head up in the air. I ain't what I'm talking about. He just said to treat everybody right, don't look down on nobody, and because slavery was over once, don't condemn the whole Caucasian race. Bill Jackson, he was born when you was born. He didn't have nothing to do with it. So why should you blame him? So I learned years ago by living in an all Caucasian community, I never looked down on anybody. I used to go down and visit my dad. He lived down in Morgan County, and sometimes I didn't have no place to go, and me and my wife just sat down. It was full of Caucasian people. You know how people visited. It would be completely full. There'd be nothing but Caucasian people there visiting me. So I grew up to not look down on nobody. And I feel that way today. I told my kid, you marry who you want to marry. And if you marry across the line, that's your business. I don't have to sleep with them. If they don't take a bath, I don't have to smell them. Don't care. You marry who you want to marry. And that's the way it was. That's the way I still feel.
You know, I noticed out on the charts out there that a lot of the Letts and Simpsons guys, males, were involved in music.
In what?
Music.
Yeah.
Have a lot of musical talent.
Well, there was one person that was in relation to the family, but I don't know what. I got to think of his name, Cy Oliver. Did you ever hear of it?
Yeah.
Well, he is connected with my family.
Okay.
The Letts, the Cleverts. See, there was 7 different people. There was the Letts, the Simpsons, the Calamans, the Pointers, the Cliffords, the Guys. There's one more. I can't think of it. Now, I'm not going to. Some of them, Peter Lett, he went over in Pennsylvania and passed for white. Well, nobody, that's his business. So he went over there and passed for white. Since then, some of the family has contacted our family. There was a Clifford. They used to live down here by Shawnee somewhere, and they used to come to the hospital. My 2 first cousins were worked there as nurses' aides. So they used to sit around and joke about, your name's Clifford, my name's Clifford. We're country cousins. And they joked about it for years. So one day, one of my uncles said, well, next time you're down there, ask him what his father's name was. And they told him. He said, now, find out what his grandfather's name was. Next time he come up, they had babies. John, well, that jive. Now ask him who his great-grandfather was. She told him, next time she said, well, he don't know it, and don't tell him. He is your country cousin. So see things like that crop up, you know. And my family wasn't interested in blowing the whistle on nobody. You know what I mean. Why cause anybody any trouble? Vandy G, she was Vandy Lett. She went away with a white family that took care of the, they used to, when white people traveled way back in the 1800s, they took a whole entourage with them, their servants and stuff. These are millionaires. So while she was down there, she saw the name Lett in Georgia. So she looked it up and called him up. Where are you from? He said, I'm glad to talk to a Lett. I'm from Zanesville, Ohio, is where my people come from. And I really don't look down on people because a Negro raised me. But you see, since he was a Lett and come from Zanesville, Ohio, in the early 1800s, he was one of them.
Right.
But she said, I wasn't about to tell him. He come out, showed me his wife. She looked white, you know what I mean. That's the reason she was working for this family. She looked Caucasian. But she said, I had no way. I don't want to blow the whistle on nobody. Talked to him, visited him, told him goodbye, and I left. So there was a whole lot of Letts, males, that has crossed the line years and years ago. I read one time, they believe besides there's 20 million blacks in this country, there's at least 15 million more that has just a drop. Not blood, it's genes, you know. We used to say blood, but it's not blood, it's the gene. Your gene pool have a little bit of it in them. So I think since that thing happened in 1860, greatest thing that ever happened. It's great. Give it another 100 years, people won't even talk about it.
Right.
You know, Methuselah lived 900 some years old. If Methuselah hadn't have died, you'd have still been driving an ox cart. By him living 2,000 years, he lived 969 years. Had he lived, still living, he wouldn't have allowed you to have a car. His stature, and stature in the community, the old must die. You know, when you bury somebody, they say the young may die. The old must die. And times never changes till the olds pass on. And that includes me. I'm going to go too. I'll soon be in Shady Lane.
We don't want to, but it has to happen.
Oh yeah, that's life.
Well, so now, did you play music? Were you?
Oh no, I couldn't play music. You know, until I was 20 years old, I didn't know there was any music but the Grand Ole Opry.
Okay.
That's what everybody listened to.
Is that your favorite?
Well, what we'd do, we'd gather at a man's house, maybe be 8 or 10 there listening to it. This was all Caucasian people mainly, but there was some few blacks. Well, I've been to many Caucasian man's houses. Careful, come Saturday night and listen to the music. No, come on in. And I'd sit there and listen to the music. In fact, when Joe Lewis fought several of these fights, I'd get on the phone and ask some white family, careful, I come listen to the fight. No, they had radio. We didn't have one. We'd go listen to the fight. Things done pretty good. We got along pretty good. And can I tell you something funny?
Go ahead.
We went to a meeting one night. There was a PTA, and they'd have big feeds there. You know, women would bring in pies, cakes, potato salad. So I'm about 7 or 8 years old, and I ain't bashful. And I went in and got me a piece of pie. The woman said, if you want more, come back. So I'm back and got another piece of pie. So my brother and another colored guy that was there said, where are you getting that pie? I said, in there, you go ahead and get it. Oh, see, they're older than me. A kid don't know.
Right.
They said, well, I said, don't be bashful. They told me to come back. I wouldn't go. I said, well, I'll go in and get you some. So I went in and got it. I want 2 pieces, I told the lady. I didn't realize how it looked. I took it out and gave it to them. Boy, they said that pie was, you want some more? They said, yeah. I said, don't be bashful, do like me. Well, oh, no, I ain't going in. I went in and got 2 more pieces. So I didn't realize I was being seen like that, so I give it to them. So just before they left, they heard a couple of women talking. And she said, well, it was a nice TA tonight. I was about 7 or 8, but I never forgot. I was about 10. She said, yes, and he was a little colored boy, and boy, was he eating pie. They thought I was eating that pie. Later on, when I got older, I told them, boy, you fellas was dirty to put that on me. Now, what was you going to ask me?
Well, no, I was just going to ask you if there was any, did your children play any music or?
No, sir. None of them was it.
Oh, sure.
That's it.